Welcome everyone to our third webinar in our series AI with the Friday Institute, from Insight to Innovation in Higher Education. We are excited to be with you today in January 2025. It's hard to believe that the calendar has turned over to a new year, but we are excited for what this is going to bring for us. Lots of new things, innovations, and really settling into what this AI business looks like in our space. And so I am happy to join with you this afternoon from the Friday Institute. We are part of the College of Education at NC State. And what I love about my job is we're able to bring together those three pieces of research, policy, and practice, and really understand how each of those informs the other, what that looks like in tandem, to make sure that we're having a positive impact on those that we work with, K-20 and beyond, in North Carolina and across the country. I'm Emma Broughton. I'm the Director of Digital Learning here at the Friday Institute, and it is my pleasure to be joined by my colleague, Laura Fogel. Laura, you want to do a quick introduction?
Absolutely. Thanks, Emma. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm Laura Fogel, and I'm the director of the Media and Education Technology Resource Center, which is the library for the College of Education. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Laura. Our goal is really to think about how can we empower our educators across the state, and especially across higher education, to think about AI literacy. So how do we provide some hands-on guidance? How can we transform that teaching and learning piece? And so that is our overarching goal for what we do here with AI at the Friday Institute, and really are hoping to bring that to you through this four-part webinar series. I've mentioned that today is our third in the series. We're talking about embracing the now. So hopefully you've had a chance to be a part of or listen to some of the recordings previously about stepping into AI and navigating that maze. And then later in February, we're going to really dig deep into leading the way. And so we'll share some links to register for that session later on. But that's where we want to showcase what you might be doing in your spaces. We'll provide you with some examples today of what it looks like from some of our staff and faculty here at NC State. But stay tuned for an opportunity to showcase how you might be leading the way with AI in your practice as well. So as we think about what we want to do during our time together, we want to think about some student-focused instruction and ethical, responsible use. We'll have some conversation around the balance of data privacy and learner needs, especially in the K-20 space. And then hopefully you'll think about how you might continue your journey to AI literacy. I really wanted to start off our conversation this afternoon, though, by referring to a document that's been published for the K-12 space, but I think makes a lot of sense when I am thinking about implementing AI for student use, whether that be in K-12 or in higher ed. And so the National Ed Tech Plan was republished in 2024 around these three pillars. It came out from the Office of Education Technology from the USED. And the first one makes a lot of sense to me, thinking about the digital use divide that exists in our work with students. How are students using the technology that we have, specifically the AI? Are we thinking about more passive consuming ways that students might be using that technology? Or are we thinking about more active and creative opportunities for their learning experiences to happen? That second pillar is about that digital design divide. So how are we as instructional designers or faculty and teachers thinking about how we construct those learning experiences, and what professional learning do we need to be able to make sure we're effective in designing those experiences? And then that last piece, the digital access divide, how do we think about students' access to this technology, whether that be through good broadband connectivity, devices, or through access to the technology tools and platforms themselves? I know at NC State, we have an opportunity for some of these to be free or affordable for our students, but a lot of times full access to these technologies require a paid subscription. And so that freemium model that might exist for our students can definitely be a challenge and keep that full digital access from happening. And so I'd really encourage you to take a look at this National Ed Tech Plan to think about how that might apply in your learning spaces as well, and what you might be moving towards as you think about incorporating digital learning and especially those AI pieces. In our last webinar, we talked about the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, looked at these 5 different components of what it might take for us to make sure that we're doing things safely and responsibly. I definitely encourage you to check that out, to dig into some of those details around those safe and effective systems, how we might have some algorithmic bias that exists in our world and in our AI use, the data privacy that's so important that we'll talk about some more today, the notice and explanation, and then the human alternatives or different options that folks might have to opt out for interacting with AI and choose a person instead. That also led us to talking about how do we evaluate the AI that we might want to use with our students or in our own practice. So, how do we navigate the maze to monitor for data privacy, to assess for accuracy, to zero in on bias, and then get to the space where we can really evaluate the value of what that might look like, both in our efficiency and in our thinking about learning and instruction for our students. So, would definitely encourage, thank you, Laura, for putting into the chat a lot of those different links that are important for us to think about as we're considering all of the different examples that we show you today. Right before we dive into those examples, though, I wanted to take a couple of minutes and explore what we are doing right now with AI. A lot of times ends up being at that surface level of the water there because it's about efficiencies, right? There's lots of things that are happening right now that allow us to think about we can do this faster, we can do this better, we can substitute AI for our time that is needed to complete some of these tasks. But I am really excited and encouraged by what I think are going to be the transformations with AI. And Laura, you and I have had some conversations about what this will look like as our work evolves, but especially as the technologies evolve as well. And so I wanted to have a conversation with you, Laura, this afternoon, thinking about some of these examples of that AI use. So a lot of times we're thinking about interacting with AI. That's what we hear about the most, engaging with the adaptive technology that adjusts to data collected. But I'd love to hear your perspective on these other 2 examples of AI use where we think about creating with AI or problem solving with AI. Any thoughts or reflections you might have?
Yeah, so as you said, Emma, right, that first interacting with AI and improving our efficiency, kind of workplace improvements. We see that as the entry level, I think, for AI, where a lot of people are engaging with that, maybe sometimes not even realizing they're engaging with AI. And so the other levels, I think, have been more intentional and maybe required more expertise, background, and training. But what I've noticed is that as generative AI tools in particular, I've seen this, have evolved over the last few years, that the skills that you need to be able to create with AI and problem solve with AI, they're really collapsing how much background you need to have, and they're much more user friendly. So I think the potential, those barriers are being reduced. And so the potential for more people to be able to get involved, if we think back to that, what you were sharing about the ed tech plan, get involved with the designing and not just using it in a really basic way. I think we're seeing that those potentials are being unlocked, so that not only can educators be doing that, but their students K-20 can be doing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where we're going to see that full transformation happen, where things are really going to start changing the way that things look in meaningful ways in our classrooms that have impact on learning and opportunities for innovation and transformation that were previously inconceivable. I think those dreams and ideas that we've had that might have seemed impossible before might be more of a reality for us sooner rather than later. I appreciate some of that reflection for us on those different examples of AI use. The other thing that I think is important for us to touch on this afternoon as well, is how we think about teaching with AI or teaching about AI. And some of our examples are going to dive into this a little bit because what we often hear is how teachers might be navigating AI for their students, or they are using AI in order to make something easier to do in their classroom. They're designing a lesson, they're developing some of their materials, and they're navigating that maze for their students. And they are using AI in a way that is teaching with AI rather than about AI. When we move into the navigating with students or navigating by students, a lot of times we have to make sure that we're talking about AI in a way that allows us to think about how that machine works and what are the processes it's taking in order to take all of that data, run it through the algorithm, and give us an output. And so when we are navigating with AI, it's more of a side by side with students where we might be working with them in a space where we are actively engaged with them. We might be modeling, they might be then doing themselves, versus that navigating by students where they are fully running with the AI and they have in all ways then navigated to make sure that this is ethical, it's responsible. They are fully understanding, we hope, in that AI literacy piece, what that means for them to be using the AI in their practice or in their demonstration even of their learning. And so for me, I'm constantly thinking about how do I also scaffold for a new technology in use in my classroom. A lot of times it starts with me becoming comfortable and using that technology as the teacher or the instructor. And then I might do that with my students in a side-by-side way before I fully launch that and give them more independence and have them doing that on their own. And so we see that happening in AI implementation in classrooms as well. So we'll keep that in mind as we look at some of our examples this afternoon. I want to dive into the first one from a colleague of mine here at the Friday Institute, Dr. Rebecca Davis. And so Laura, I turn it over to you to explain a little bit about Rebecca, and then we have a recording that we'll listen to, have her explain what she's been doing in her classroom.
Yeah, thank you. So, Dr. Davis is a research scholar at the Friday Institute. She also teaches a class for the College of Education. So, her students are graduate students within the College of Education. She also does research on AI. So, her example really looks at two different perspectives, that instructor perspective, but then also some research that she's doing.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start her
Hi,
audio.
everyone. My name is Rebecca Davis, and I'm a research scholar at the Friday Institute at NC State University. It's in the College of Ed. I live in Elon, North Carolina, and work in Raleigh at the Friday Institute, and really across the state with the sorts of things that I do. My two examples today of AI use that I've come across in my work and apply specifically to my situation, first of all, is in my teaching of a graduate level course. It is Ed 730, Introduction to Qualitative Research and Education. And I adapted this wording from what was recommended by our College of Education. This is in my syllabus, and I use it as a starting point for a discussion the first day on what use of AI, if any, might be appropriate for our context. I do share my opinion and invite students to share theirs, emphasizing the fact that I think using AI to check things and suggest revisions to things that I have already written is not assistance or prompt with a task, especially for students and colleagues whose first language is not English. They especially benefit from this type of activity. What I do feel is inappropriate is using Gen AI tools to generate any part of an assignment and then just editing it myself to the desired end. So putting in a prompt that will write something for what I need, and then me only making corrections is not appropriate. I do like the statement that the College of Education provides, because it still includes an option for content creation with Gen AI. You know, I'm open to it, but I want it cited. It's not off the table. I personally advise that they avoid it at all, so that there's no question. You don't want to run into somebody down the road who thinks that any use is inappropriate. So definitely they should always talk about it and always ask. But then there's a link in the syllabus for them to go to a place where they can cite what they used. And always, you know, if they have a question and they're unsure, they can ask. It's interesting. And like I said, and that's where it ends. You know, if they have a question about what's ethical or responsible or what would be allowed, they can always ask me individually. My second example of AI use is a project that I've been working on with Georgia State University folks. It's an NSF grant to implement micro courses for computer science learning, especially amongst education faculty and pre-service teachers. So we're focused on integrating CS topics like AI into learning experiences for pre-service and in-service teachers. In addition, we're focusing on this by offering training to their instructors. So at NC State, we offered the ISTE AI course, Artificial Intelligence Explorations for Educators, at no cost to 16 teacher educators so far. So, and when I say teacher educators, we've actually opened it up. It doesn't have to be just tenure track faculty. It can be adjunct instructors. It could be graduate students who are teaching courses. It can be professionals who offer education experiences to teachers. So we're talking about pre-service and in-service teacher educators. So 16 of them have done it so far, and many have already started using what they learned with their students. The images on the slide I have here represent just a few of the items created and shared with learners. So the GSU team and I have written about some of our results for this, and we're going to be sharing the results of that paper at the SITE conference 2025 in March. And the title, if you want to look it up later, that paper, which will be posted, is Shared Practices in Faculty-Driven Integration of Generative AI into Teacher Education Courses. It's kind of a summary of the things that we found out worked so far with those teacher educators and what we think might be promising for this topic in the future. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and I hope you have a good experience today in this webinar.
Awesome. Loved hearing some these details from Rebecca. We've just put into the chat, those of you who are part of the College of Ed here at NC State, if you would be interested in taking out that ISTE course for AI explorations that runs, I think, from February to April. You can contact Rebecca Davis. So her email is there in the chat for you if you are one of our folks here at NC State. So feel free to reach out to her about that. What I love about what Rebecca is doing is that she is having those conversations with her students. She's talking about what's appropriate, what's necessary, what that looks like, both in writing and then during her class as well. And so I think there's great value and need to make sure that we're being transparent and clear with our students about what's appropriate and what might not be. We shared in the first webinar the continuum that was published by Matt Miller for what constitutes as cheating. And I think that's a great graphic, a great visual. If there's any questions that you might have or that your students might have, starting there with that conversation and in the beginning of the semester is really important to make sure that we are properly communicating and setting those guidance and guardrails for our students to be successful in our classrooms. I want to move into that second example and hear from Laura about Dr. Sarah Cannon.
Yeah. Before I jump into Dr. Cannon's example, I just wanted to follow up on one thing you were saying, Emma, and reference what Dr. Davis shared. Is it's really interesting to me how that continuum presents itself in different courses, and that, right, so for the course that I teach, I told my students that they could use AI to get that first draft, right? And Dr. Davis said very clearly that that is not okay for her class. So I think you might believe that your view of what is appropriate is obvious to everybody, but it might be different from what they're hearing from other classes. So it is really important to be explicit about your expectations and what you think is appropriate. So Dr. Cannon has graciously shared with us another example. She is the director of professional education within the College of Ed. So she is working with candidate teachers. This particular course is an assessment course, and it's for students who are preparing to be teachers in grades 6 through 12. So she has a plan and hasn't implemented it just yet, but what she is planning to do is challenge her candidate teachers to think about how they can help their future students understand AI. So back to that idea of teaching with AI or teaching about AI, she is teaching about AI, and she is asking her students, who will also become teachers, to think about how they could teach about AI. So she introduces them to AI tools that could be used with middle school and high school students, and how that those students could use the tools to generate content with AI. And one of the tools that she is planning to use is called Deep Dream Generator. So it's an image generator that it creates a high resolution image from prompts that you give it, and you don't have to create an account. So that's one of the factors to consider in that privacy realm of whether students have to have an account or not. Another tool that she is featuring is a chatbot creation platform that's in the image here. It's called botmake.io, and you don't have to be a coder to be able to program this chatbot, and then let other people, you get to code it, and then other people can interact with it. So that's part of how she plans to establish some base knowledge about AI with her students and let them experiment with those tools. And then the other image that's there, the hands-on AI projects for the classroom, is a publication from ISTE, and she uses examples from that publication to share with her students some lessons that could be used in secondary classrooms, and then challenges them to review those projects and identify how the K-12 students are interacting with AI in those projects. So thinking about that access, or excuse me, the use divide, right? And making sure that students are really interacting with the AI, and also looking at how the projects are connected to learning standards for a content area. So after they look at how somebody else is suggesting using AI with secondary students, then she challenges her students to work in a small group to brainstorm their own ideas about how they could potentially use AI to meet learning standards in their own content area, and then to discuss the benefits and constraints of using those AI tools. So some of those constraints would be making sure that you're not sharing student identifying data with an AI, that you're thinking about that data privacy. One way to address that is that issue of accounts and but also what information you as the instructor are sharing with the AI. So in this assessment course, one of the conversations that they've had has been, right, AI tools can help us use data like assessment data and create visualizations. But if we're going to leverage AI tools to do that work for us, how are we being sure that we're protecting our students' data? So you're not putting your student's name in there. You're not putting your students, if there's an ID number that could be tracked back to that student, how are you protecting that and ensuring that that's not being shared inappropriately when you're using that AI?
That's really interesting, Laura, because I think that when I am talking to folks about using AI, especially with Dr. Cannon's undergraduate assessment class here, I'm thinking now about how AI might even be used to grade or evaluate students and what that looks like, and how this course specifically for Dr. Cannon and her students and for our teachers really is going to be an evolving landscape to think about. Are we okay with AI grading our students? Are students okay with getting a grade from AI? And when do we get to a place where AI that students create, AI generated work that students have, is now being graded by the teacher's AI? And so kind of that concern about what that looks like in the future for us when that type of thing is happening. When I've been working with students, and some of the research that I've read is that students, while they understand that they might be assessed by AI, they still really want their teacher, their instructor's engagement with them. They are benefiting when it's side by side with their teacher, whether that be a tutor, AI chatbot, like a tutor, whether that be a type of platform that's assessing students' work and then giving them feedback. They still want that human engagement, which I really think is important for us to keep in mind. And I really appreciate that Dr. Cannon is pulling in some chatbots here so it can provide a model for appropriate engagement with that type of tool as well. I think sometimes when we aren't explaining and modeling that for our students, for our learners in the classroom, they might be going out independently and having engagement that they might think are real. We're hearing that a lot of times, that this humanizing or anthropomorphizing of AI is giving these human qualities to a machine. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. We talked about that a little bit in our last session together. And so making sure that we're keeping that in mind as we are having students use those platforms is really important.
Yeah, I think right, this issue of AIs being part of the assessment loop, I think is really an emerging area, and I, like you, have heard conversations about students who are getting feedback that is generated by AIs and how they feel about that, and that having that open conversation with students, and then how do we have that conversation at the how do we prepare our educators to have that conversation with parents also about what where AI is in the loop, and assuring them that there's always a human in the loop that's making sure that it's appropriate assessment, appropriate feedback that students are getting.
Yeah. And just like we expect students to let us know when they're using AI and give that type of citation, we have a responsibility to tell our students when we are using AI, so that they are aware of that themselves. And so if AI makes a mistake, if there's an error that happens, they know to have a conversation with their instructor about it, that they can do something. Maybe there's an opt-out option, even if that needs to be allowed. And so that is, I think, part of that transparency that really goes both ways in those kinds of spaces. So let's move into that third example here from Dr. Matt Reynolds. Laura, explain this one a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Reynolds is an assistant teaching professor here in the College of Education in the science, technology, engineering, and math department. And he prepares students to teach secondary science. So in his course, he introduces undergraduate students to the concept of AI with the 5 big ideas from AI for K-12, right? Because although they're secondary students, they're preparing to go into a K-12 setting. And so his first example that he shares with them is Slides Go. It's AI tool. So that's one of those efficiency increasers that we talked about. And he has created some slides about some science topics and shares those with the students and challenges them to analyze the slides to see what AI did well and what it didn't do so well. And so there's an example of one of those slides here for you to see. As you can see, right, it's a visually appealing slide, but in some of the examples, like this one, the images are not about what the topic is what the topic is. And in some of them, the details that the slides provide are not correct. So they might present common misconceptions as facts, right? So you definitely, when you're the science teacher, you don't want your slides doing that. So that's the first thing, kind of somewhat of a cautionary tale. And then he follows up this activity by having his students use ChatGPT to create a lesson, and he scaffolds their interaction with ChatGPT by providing a structure for the prompts and having them see that if they have certain elements in their prompt, that they get better results. And then they, as a group, reflect on their AI use, its ethical concerns, and how they might balance that in the classroom. So here it gets a little meta, but in Dr. Reynolds' example, right, he, as the instructor, was teaching with AI, and then he's talking to his students about teaching with AI, but then he is also teaching about AI, right? So he's teaching his future educators about AI and its limitations and its benefits, and encouraging them to make good decisions about how to teach with AI when they are instructors. So for example, making sure that one of the things that they talk about the concerns would be the data privacy that we were talking about. So they discuss using AI for differentiation, right? So if I'm using an AI to create a lesson plan, I might think, well, there's not any student data involved in that process. But one of the things that I'm really excited about AI doing is that differentiation piece. And that's one of the things that Dr. Reynolds talks about to them. And that is the potential place where you might be sharing, if you're not being thoughtful, student data with the AI. Like, okay, well, I have this student who has this particular need. And if you inadvertently share the student's name or any identifiable information when you're asking the AI to help you think of a differentiation, that there's some potential data privacy issues there.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that this is an opportunity for Dr. Reynolds to think about multiple ways to kind of challenge, interrogate how AI is being used, not only in his classroom, but also in future classrooms as well. And really thinking about what that looks like for those future science teachers as students and also as future teachers. And so I appreciated you saying this is kind of meta, the way that it's all these different pieces that come together in this example. Awesome. Our last example then for us this afternoon is we're going to look at the NELA cohort with Dr. Kathy Williams, Dr. Pat Ashley, and Dr. Claudia Smith, who are part of the NC State's Educational Leadership Academy. And this is a longstanding academy here out of the College of Ed at NC State that has been developing principals across North Carolina for a number of years, and it's pretty remarkable the work that they do, pretty significant and has a big impact. And I was so honored when they came to me this past summer and said, Emma, we've worked with you before on digital learning things. Our cohort needs help with this AI thing. What are we going to do? How are we going to incorporate this? What is this going to look like? Can you help us? And so what the past 8 months have been then is really a coaching opportunity to work with their faculty, these 3 faculty members, Dr. Williams, Dr. Ashley, and Dr. Smith, to think about kind of at a large scale, not just from assignment to assignment or class to class, but how they might be approaching AI with their future principals in their class. And so we first started to meet early last summer in June to think about what this could be. They shared their syllabus with me, they shared their program with me, and I had a chance to really dig in and provide a number of examples of how, if I was a student in their class, how I would be using AI. And I'll be honest, and I think they would be honest with you, there were several times they said, Emma, this is not an assignment my student could use AI on. Our students could not do that with AI. And I showed them a few examples of how AI actually could be used in some of those ways. And so it was really interesting to hear and see that evolution of what that looked like for their own training and development and support. And I love that we'll continue to think about that digital design divide. When I first mentioned that as part of the NETP earlier in this session, they're really thinking about how they can grow and evolve themselves to incorporate this technology in meaningful and effective ways for their students, but also for those future principals too. And so what that looked like later in the summer and early fall was I was able to join them for 2 90-minute classes where the first session we thought about AI as a student. What does that look like to be responsible to cite AI? How do I use that as a student at NC State in this NELA class? What does that look like? And in the second session, we then dug into what does it look like to lead a school with AI and have a vision for that, what that can be, and what are the K-12 students and the teachers that I might be working with, what are their needs, and how do I develop and grow and serve as that lead learner, lead digital learner in my school. Then later this fall, fall 2024, we had a full day where we had an in-person professional development opportunity with those aspiring principals, soon to be principals, and their mentor principals, the principals that are in their schools. So we had about 75 folks who are here at the Friday Institute for an in-person session for them to really dig into some scenarios, some of our toolkit for what this looks like to be a leader in schools thinking about AI. And it was a really great opportunity for learning, engagement, conversations, not only with the faculty and the students, but also with folks who are out in schools working as principals right now. Since that in-person PD day in early October, the USED has also published their own toolkit for leaders. And so, Laura, thank you for dropping that into the chat. There's been a lot of really good information that's come out in this past, especially 6 months, related to leadership and teaching and leading with AI in schools. And so I would definitely encourage you to check out that toolkit if you have an interest in what that can look like as you're thinking about this in the K-12 context, especially. So over the last 6 months or so, we really encouraged the student application of using AI in this NELA cohort as students, but then also as school leaders. So in our last session, which will be with students in February, we're going to ask them to share and showcase what that's looked like from the evolution of their thinking, what this can be, what their vision for it is, to more purposeful application and operationalizing of it in their space. So I'm really encouraged to have these conversations with this faculty team to see how they've had it embedded into their work as faculty themselves, but also in the application of it for their students too. And so hopefully we'll have a really dynamic and engaging opportunity of peer-to-peer learning during that 90-minute session that we'll have later on in February. One of the things that comes up though in almost every conversation that I have with this faculty group is this idea of hybrid intelligence and metacognitive laziness. So if you haven't heard of these two terms before, they might be new to you. This is a research article about metacognitive laziness and the effects of generative AI on learning motivation, processes, and performance. Because what these faculty folks are really thinking about is, what are my priorities and values that the students in my class need to be able to do when they are done in my class? When they graduate, what are the types of knowledge and skills and experiences do they need to have? And how do we shape that? Is it based on what I have always valued because it's tradition, or is it because this is really good practice to be a principal? Unfortunately, what there's a big concern about right now is this piece of metacognitive laziness. And how do we use AI in a way that gets us away from that true learning and those skills and experiences that we need? And where do we as educators really think about, how do I value the process of learning over the product of what my students can create? How do I make sure that those neural pathways are still being created in this space of kind of hybrid intelligence? And I have to admit, I don't know if I'm a fan of this term yet, hybrid intelligence, where it's the co-intelligence of the human brain and the AI space. Do I really like that term? I'm not quite sure that I'm going to adopt that one, but it's really thinking about how AI can help us think about this learning piece or do this work for us in this hybrid kind of way. And so if you haven't explored either of these terms, I definitely encourage you to do that. I wonder, Laura, if you have any reactions or responses to either of these terms as well.
Well, I think, yeah, I think I like co-intelligence better than I like hybrid intelligence, but I'm not, I need to unpack why. But it really, I think, connects for me to that idea of setting the expectations for students, you know, in that first example that we talked about with Dr. Davis, in your syllabus of what AI use is appropriate and what is not, because this is the why behind that, right? This is thinking about your goals for your learners and how AI can be used to reach those goals, or how AI might potentially interfere with those goals, and what guardrails or I don't want to say limitations, but what expectations you have for your students about use or not use. And so I think there's a lot for all of us to really wrestle with here, because I think, right, it also can connect to the idea of how we as instructors are using AI ourselves, right? What should students be able to expect from us? And are we being metacognitively lazy in some ways, right? So I think there's many different perspectives that we can look at this from, and it really connects to those initial ideas that we were talking about.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about the why is this so important for us to learn? Why do I need to do this? That's been a question, I think, forever in education. And so really being able to explain that and articulate and show the value there for for us as instructors, but then also for our students so that they can understand there is value for me to work through this process. Here's what I will get out of this type of process that I'm doing, rather than giving it away and abdicating that to some type of technology. So I think that can be really important. As we're wrapping up, then I would just encourage that continuing to evaluate that use of AI with students is we're considering that process over product, as I just mentioned. What's that learning process? And am I evaluating and considering that in the student learning experience versus they've turned in an assignment and now I can grade just the assignment? And so a lot of times that's a shift for us as instructors to prioritize that process. How do I guide them through access and accountability for what that looks like in my space? And then I want to encourage folks too to reframe and revisit the digital wellness piece with our students as well, especially with AI and what seems real or what can easily be done. It can be harmful for our social and emotional well-being. And so that is kind of a nuanced and important piece that our students really are clamoring for support and understanding, and need some explanation and guidance for what they can do and should be doing when it comes to using technology, not only in their academic work, but also in their personal lives as well. And then as educators, we can examine and discuss our policy and practices. We can build in efficiencies and we can get training so that we can hopefully get to that space of full transformation and the power of what's been promised. And then identifying those values and needs in our courses and in our learning materials for students. So I would encourage you, as you're thinking about what this looks like, to build your own AI literacy and AI fluency, to keep some of these in mind as you're considering how do I move forward with using AI in my own practice and also with my students for their learning. As we wrap up then, just a reminder that we have our final session coming up in the beginning of February, and we want to hear from you, and we want to highlight and showcase what's happening in your space, in your classroom, whether you're staff or faculty. How are you using AI for efficiency? How are you using it for any of those examples that we shared with you earlier? We will be doing an outreach here in the next week or so to inquire with you to see whether or not you would be able to share some of those examples like you've seen today during our session. We also have a workshop that's in person at the Friday Institute coming up at the end of February. We would love to see you here in our space in Raleigh. We will be engaged in some hands-on activities. You'll get some support for wherever you are stepping into AI or using AI. We're also going to have discussions with some of our colleagues around, so what's this whole deal with AI and intellectual property? And I submitted an article to a journal and I think I got feedback from AI, and that whole conversation of what that looks like in the academic space. So would love to see you here at the Friday Institute on February 25th for that workshop. And then also a reminder about that opportunity. If you are here at the College of Ed at NC State and would like to have the ISTE course for free, you can reach out to Rebecca Davis, and her contact information is there in the chat for you as well. Really appreciate your time with us this afternoon, especially on what looks to be hopefully a snowy weekend here in North Carolina. Hope that everybody stays warm and safe as you may be headed home or you may be bundled up and ready to stay where you are for the rest of the weekend. But otherwise, we will plan to see you in a couple of weeks for session 4. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll drop our emails into the chat if you'd like to connect. Really appreciate what you are doing, especially as you get started here with your spring semester and know that your time is limited. Thank you for spending almost an hour with us today. Take care, folks.